All right, so we are going to be talking about the nervous system today. Here is a rabbit, and it does have a head tilt. So we get this head tilt from issues with our nervous system as well as some other stuff that can be going on. But when we see this, we definitely think some nerve damage or something is happening with our nervous system. So our nervous system is absolutely a complex system of a way that we communicate with our body, right? So when we're talking about the nervous system, I'm not talking about you being antsy or, my gosh, I'm so nervous, I have a test tomorrow. But what we're really talking about is all of these little electrical impulses that are going on in your body. So your nervous system detects and processes your both internal information and external information. So when you touch something that's hot, your body pulls away from that because it's hot. So it's sending and communicating that, hey, this is hot, it's a nerve, it's burning, don't touch it anymore. Um, so that's an external stimulus. We have our internal stimulus, though. Remember, we're talking about the respiratory system and our circulatory system and triggering breathing and triggering our heart rate. Well, that's going to be your internal mechanism. So there's sensors in your body that are like, hey, I don't have a lot of oxygen right now, so I'm going to trigger a breath. So that is also part of your nervous system. So both internal and then external stimuli are providing us triggers, right? Are providing us kind of that cause and effect. There's three types of breakdowns of our nervous system within our body. Generally, we think of our central nervous system and that being our kind of our main go-to, but we're going to break it down. And before we can break down the different systems, we are going to first talk about our nerve cell. Nerve cells are also known as neurons. They are your base unit of the nervous system. So when we talk about the integument system being a whole bunch of epithelial cells, well, your nervous system is a whole bunch of neurons, okay? So those of you that have taken psych before, you've seen this image, you've talked about nerve cells. Psychology goes into the nervous system quite a bit, but so does animal behavior too, right? All of our fun jazz. So you will be responsible for knowing what a dendrite is, being able to identify the axon, the nucleus of a neuron, the myelin sheath. You do need to know the different parts of a nerve cell. This is important not just to be able to figure out what's going on with your animals, but it'll also help you guys as well as you are growing and developing in your brain. Just a few more years, man, it's going to be fully developed. So this is what is making up all that lovely tissue. These nerve cells also are going to send and receive electrical impulses. So you know how we talked about our body and our heart beating from electrical pulses? This is why they do the charge things and they like shock your heart in the movies. Well, your neurons work also off of electrical impulses. So again, you being hydrated is important because water is a carrier of electricity, right? So it's a conductor. So the more water we have in our body, the easier things are going to be able to move. Back into that picture, that notovernier is in between the myelin sheaths. So this again, I'm going to be able to jump in between those myelin sheaths in that node. All right, so we'll break down, we'll talk first about the central nervous system. So when we look at the central nervous system, you're going to refer that to as your CNS. You'll see that very often in your textbooks. And why do I need to be able to know my central nervous system? Because I'm going to give medications that are going to affect my central nervous system. So your central nervous system, if you think of it, is everything in the center of your body or center of your animal. So it's going to be the brain and your spinal cord, right? So this is the main control system of your body. Pretty much everything's coming through to your brain and it runs through your spinal cord. Your brain is made up of multiple sections. We are not going to need to know what those different chunks of the brain are. If you are interested, though, I definitely recommend you look into it. Again, this is where your psychology classes come in because you learn about the different sections of your brain, and each part of your brain does something else. It's responsible and triggers different processes. So you guys have heard of left brain, right brain people, or creative people, numbers people, right? It tends to be what part of your brain you think with. We know though that you actually think with all of your brain, but some people are more, your brain is a muscle. So the more you use it, the more strong it is, and you can use more parts more, right? So if you're super creative, you're going to use that part of your brain more so than other parts. So you're going to work those muscles more. Kind of that same concept. So we do have those different pieces of our brain. Again, most of you, when you get to college, like one of your electives, take a psych course. It'll be pretty fun. And you can learn a whole bunch about the brain and how that works. We then have what's called the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. And this is, if you think of everything on the peripheral, right? So it's on the side. So your peripheral nervous system is running throughout the body. It is what's going away from your spinal column. So it's the sensory nerves that run information toward. And then we have the information also that runs away. You're going to hear of nerves. We have sensory nerves and we have motor nerves. So the nerve that is feeling that hot water, that flame, or that hot pot, that's a sensory nerve. So it's an afferent nerve. That is what's going to be sending information to your brain. And then the brain processes that information and it triggers a motor neuron, or an afferent nerve, and that is what's going to pull your hand back. So there's two different nerves that are happening, two different nerves that are involved in that action. So you have one sensory nerve which feels it, and then when we're talking about feeling, that's the signals being sent to your brain. And then when we have an action, that's the motor. So if I think of a motor, motors move things, and so that's going to cause a reaction, or that's going to cause some physical movement in your limb. So your peripheral nervous system then is your PNS, and that is your limbs, right? Everything that is flowing to or from your central nervous system. This is going to include your cranial and your spinal nerves. So your spinal cord is your cord, right? And you can see a pretty good image of that in this picture, that's labeled pretty clearly with the horse. And then you've got your spinal nerves and your cranial nerves. So you have nerves around your head and around your brain. So those are also your peripheral nerves. And then we have an autonomic nervous system. So this is the ANS. So your ANS is a self-governing nervous system. Remember, we talk about the fact that you can't hold your breath. Like, you can hold your breath, but only to a point, and then eventually your body takes over. Well, it's your autonomic nervous system that takes over. There is a breakdown in your autonomic system. You have what's called a sympathetic, and you have a parasympathetic piece of that. We don't go into the two parts of it, but you will when you guys go into your technician school or medical training. You will talk about the differences in the autonomic nervous system. It is, it's important to know, right? But it's not something that we need to touch on in here so much. But know that you do have your autonomic, you have auto in there. It is going to be the things that automatically happen. So they are self-governing. It's independent of thought. So your brain's not necessarily connected into the system, actually. So your brain doesn't have to work into making your heart beat, right? So it just, your heart is beating through that autonomic system. Your sympathetic system is when we talk about that fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic system is what we call, or what we know of as, a rest and restore. So you are burning a lot of energy, moving a lot of signals in your body when you're working on that fight or flight, or that sympathetic system. And then when you're sleeping, you're in that parasympathetic, not even just sleep, but when you're actually not inducing a whole bunch of stimuli, on that rest and restore aspect of things. We do know that it's not just fight or flight, so some of you are going to freeze. That is a thing as well, but whenever we're talking about that, that is our sympathetic system. if you want some extra points, go ahead, shoot me an email with the subject line ANS and let me know, are you a fight, a flight, or a freeze person, and why do you think that? So if you want some extra credit, throw me an email with the subject line ANS, and then in the message body, let me know, are you a fight, flight, a freeze, and why you think that. So this is going to be that video of the nervous system examination. So pay close attention. These are going to be the things that you don't even realize are happening in your vet clinic when you bring your animal. Cats are the same, so they do similar things with your cats as they do with the dogs. Paying special attention to when they flip the feet. So that's something that's so common that it happens so quick, right? We talk about when we do physical examinations that you will get a routine. Well, part of that routine is going to be almost like a sleight of hand, and you may not even notice that your veterinarian flips the pads of your animal's feet down, but they do. They will flip them, and it's to make sure that they are paying attention, right? And that nervous system is intact, and they'll right their feet. There is information from the crash course dude, so he is pretty awesome with the nervous system. He is going to go into what we talk about as action potential and how your nerves actually work, right? When we talk about the electricity, well, how is the electricity flowing in your body? There is a chemical aspect to that because we are a whole bunch of chemicals, as much as it might be a scary thought because chemistry is, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming. But it's pretty cool when we can break it down. We just need to have that understanding of diffusion and concentration gradients, which we've already talked about with respiration and breathing, and you've already talked about a long time ago in your bio and your chem classes when we want things to be equal, right? So we want an equilibrium. So something in the way that cells work, right, is we have a sodium-potassium pump, and that is going to assist in our electrical charge and our electrical current. So this is a really great diagram for you to look at of how the electrons move between the neuron. And so you can see this is what's called an action potential. So this sodium potassium pump is creating our action potential, and that action potential we'll go into in the second slide, and that is what is getting your neuron to move. So at the basic knowledge of it, just know that your sodium potassium pump is that charge that's responsible for the neuron action. So the blue and the purple are allowing different elements to go through the membrane, and when that happens, we're going to increase our charge. And so with that charge, then we go from a negative to positive charge. That is our action potential. Your action potential is that unevenness, and that cell membrane wants to be even, and because it's uneven, it triggers your action potential, and then it starts to work. So this diagram, if you can break it down, we have the dendrites, which are picking up this signal. So there's no energy there yet, but then they're going to eventually cross over that middle in and out, that out in line with the orange and the blue. That is your sodium potassium pump. So that's your sodium potassium pump is in the middle, and then that's what kicks into that action potential. There's a cool graph at the bottom too, so you can kind of see that gradient as well of those charges. That first, where it's no energy, sodium and potassium are even, right? They're both even. Then there's an ion gradient, so the sodium is all going out, the potassium is all coming in. Now there's a different gradient going on, and then here's where in number 3 it triggers that action for number 4. So that all happens, that action all is happening on your axon, and it's what's getting that signal to move.